Okay, so here we are. We are ready with both of our files on our desktop. The first thing that we want to do is we want to install VirtualBox software. In order to create virtual machine, we must first have the software installed, so let us do that first. If we double click on it, it will start the process of installation, which should look the same whether you're running Windows, Mac OS or Linux. The process of installation VirtualBox will be the same. And it is rather easy, since all we want to do is we want to click on next on each and every step, but just so we don't go next, let us explain what you can do with each and every step of installation. So here, as it says under the custom setup, we want to select the way we want our features to be installed. And the only thing that you might consider changing right here is this location part. If you want to change the location of VirtualBox, you can do that right here, but since I won't be doing that, I will just click on next to proceed to the next step. Here you can select whether you want a shortcut on the desktop, whether you want start menu entries. I will leave all of this to be checked since I want all of that, and I will click on next step. For this step, it says that during the installation we might be disconnected from the internet in case you're downloading or uploading something important, so best thing you can do in that case is wait for that download or upload to finish, and then you can proceed with the installation of VirtualBox. So I will just click on yes, since I'm not doing anything important over the internet, and I will click right here on install. This will ask me for my administrative password, and since I don't have one, I will simply just click on yes, and it will start the process of installing VirtualBox. This will finish in just a few seconds, and right after it, it should open up our VirtualBox. So just at this last step after installation, we want to click on finish, and in just a few seconds, this should open the VirtualBox. And here it is. So your Windows should look exactly like mine does, and what we want to do from here is we want to create the virtual machine. We're going to go onto this new button and click on it, which will open this small window that will ask us for some information about our virtual machine. So under the name, we're going to specify Kali Linux, and you can name it anything you want. It doesn't have to be Kali Linux, but just in case you might have multiple machines in VirtualBox later on, you want to have them named properly so you know which machine is which. Next thing, the machine folder is something that we don't want to change. The type we want to set on Linux, and you will notice if you typed Kali Linux, it should automatically set the type to be Linux. And the version is something that we do want to change. Now, since Kali Linux is a Debian-based operating system, we want to be searching Debian right here. And here it is. We got Debian 32-bit and Debian 64-bit. If you downloaded the 64-bit version of Kali Linux, you want to select right here Debian 64-bit. And if you downloaded the 32-bit one, you would be selecting Debian 32-bit. After we got all of these options set like this, we want to click on next. And this next step is, if you remember, we talked about that we need to give our hardware resources to our virtual machine. And right here it asks us how much RAM memory are we willing to borrow to the virtual machine to use. This RAM memory will not be available as long as our virtual machine is running, and once the virtual machine has been shut down, this RAM memory will be freed for our physical machine to use. Now, on this machine that I'm recording, I have 8 GB of RAM. So, in the best case, I want to give about 2 GB of RAM to this virtual machine. Now I can also go up to 4 GB of RAM, but it is not really needed, and there is no point in giving half of your RAM memory to your virtual machine. So 2 GB of RAM will be more than enough for my virtual machine. If your machine has 16 GB of RAM or 32 GB of RAM, feel free to give it even more RAM memory, as the more the better. And if your machine has less than 8 GB of RAM, for example it has 4 GB of RAM, then you can either go with 2 GB or you can even lower it to 1 GB of RAM. But I will simply just leave it on 2, and I will proceed to the next step. In the next step, we are creating the hard disk, so we want to select this option that says create a virtual hard disk now, and keep in mind that the recommended size of the hard disk is 8 GB. This option will come later on, but just keep it in mind. So create a virtual hard disk now, click on create, and under the hard disk file type, we want to select VirtualBox disk image. Click on next. This next question is asking us how we want to store our data on our virtual hard disk, whether we want fixed size or dynamically allocated. Keep in mind that fixed size will probably work faster, but it will also take longer time to create, while the dynamically allocated might work a little bit slower, but it will be created a lot faster. It is completely up to you. In this case, I will simply just go with dynamically allocated and I will click on next. And here is where we choose the virtual hard disk size and the file location. So here you can change the location of your virtual hard disk or simply of your virtual machine. And down here you can select how much gigabytes you want to give to your virtual machine to use as a hard disk. It said before that 8 gigabytes is recommended, but I would advise you to not go below 20 gigabytes. For the purposes of this course, I will even go up to 30 gigabytes, but you don't really have to if you don't want. Just keep in mind that you might be using this machine later on, even after this course, and you might be downloading more and more files, so if you can, make sure to give it more than it is recommended. Once you select your hard disk size, you want to click on Create. And this will create our virtual machine. As you can see right here, we got Kali Linux added, and here are all of the details about our virtual machine. Before we proceed and start it, there is only one more thing that we want to do. Remember this ISO image or this operating system? We need to somehow add it to our virtual machine, so that once we install the operating system, it knows which one to install. So to do that, we navigate back to VirtualBox, we select the virtual machine, and we click on Settings. Now you will notice that there are a bunch of settings right here, which we are going to explain later on, but for now on, you want to navigate to the storage, and here is where we want to add our ISO image of Kali Linux. To do that, we want to go to this controller IDE, and this empty part, we want to right-click and remove attachment. It will ask us, are we sure that we want to delete it? We click on remove, and after it, we want to click on this disk shape with a plus. Just click on it, and it will open up this smaller window where we want to find our Kali Linux ISO image and select it. In case you don't see it right here, you want to click on Add, and you can simply just find it on your machine. In my case, as we can see, it is right here in the download section, but in your case, if you moved it to a desktop, it will probably be on desktop as well. Since I have it in both locations, I will select the desktop one, double click it, and you will see it being added right here. Then you select it here, and click on Choose. You should see it being added right here under the controller IDE, as it says Kali Linux 2020.2. And once you see it, you can simply just click on OK. And now our virtual machine is fully created. All we are left to do in the next video is to install the Kali Linux operating system. After that, we're going to be ready to use our hacking machine. Okay, finally, we got to the part where we will install our machine with all the interesting hacking tools that we will use. Hopefully, you're excited since by the end of this video, you will have your Kali Linux machine running and ready to use. Here in our VirtualBox, in order to start the process of installation, we must first select our virtual machine and then click on this Start button right here. This will start our virtual machine and it will start the process of installation of operating system. Okay, so let me enlarge this, even though the screen of the installation will stay smaller size, but that is just during the installation, so don't worry. And right here in the installer menu, we're interested in two different options, either graphical install or install. They're pretty much the same, just graphical install is prettier, so that's why we're going to go with that one. Click here Enter. The next thing it asks us is to choose the language, and for the purposes of this course, I will proceed with English, and you can pick whichever language you want. So just select whichever language you want, I will select English and I will click on Continue. In the location part, this is only important if you want to have the correct time zone correspondent with your country, and right here it also tells us that these countries from which we can choose are strictly based on the language that we picked in the previous step. So in case your country is not on the list, like mine isn't, you can go right here on Other and select your country. If it is on the list, select it and click on Continue. Now, since this really isn't that important step, I will just proceed with the United States. And here under the configuration of the keyboard, I will select American English and I will click on Continue. After setting up our keyboard, the installation process will configure some stuff required for our machine to run, and you will notice most of the stuff is done automatically, so we don't need to worry about it too much. Whenever a certain question pops up, I will tell you what you need to select to proceed to the next step of installation. Okay, so after a few seconds, here is the first question. Let us read what it wants from us. So it says, please enter the hostname for this system, and the hostname is a single word that identifies your system to the network. If you don't know what your hostname should be, consult your network administrator. If you're setting up your own home network, you can make something up here. Okay, so we're not network administrators, therefore we can just make something up as a hostname, so let us just go with Cali. Why not? And let us go on Continue. Domain name, this is something that we want to leave empty, so just delete everything right here and proceed to the next step. Okay, so we got setup users and password step. Now, in the previous versions of Kali Linux, it usually asked you to set up the password for the root account. And unlike, for example, on Windows, we got the user accounts and administrator. On Linux, we got the user accounts and a root account. What a root account is basically the same as an administrator in Windows. It has elevated privileges, it can execute commands that user's account cannot execute, and in this newest version of Kali Linux, we are required to set up a user account. So here we got the step where we need to specify full name for the new user, and it tells us that specifying our full name would be a reasonable choice, and if it was any other course instead of a hacking course, I would also tell you to specify your name here. But I must teach you to also think like a hacker, and we hackers want to stay as low-key as possible, so specifying our real name is not an option for us here. We can just make something up instead. Let us go with Mr. Hacker. Why not? Let's click on Continue, and the username we can also leave to be Mr. Hacker. There's nothing really to change here. Of course, if you want, you can specify something other than Mr. Hacker. It is completely up to you. Just make sure you remember the username, since you will need it to log into your machine after the installation. So I will leave it on Mr. Hacker and click on Continue. And here is a step where we need to choose a password. Now, password is the important stuff. We must make sure we choose a strong password for any type of account we create. Let me tell you one interesting fact. A lot of black hat hackers were caught because they had a weak password. We are white hat hackers, but it is still a good practice to always choose a long and strong password. So let us do it. I will type mine right here. And re-enter the password. I will type it once again. You can choose any password that you want. In case you want to make sure that you typed what you wanted to type, you can click right here, Show Password in Clear, as well as in the second step, you can also check Show Password in Clear. And after you choose your password, you can click on Continue. So here, configure the clock. You can select your time zone. I will go with Eastern. And here, after loading few more additional components, it should ask us about disk partitioning. Here in the partitioning disk, we have a few options, and we're interested in the first one, which is guided to use entire disk. We're not really interested in encrypted hard disks or anything like that, so just select Use entire disk and click on Continue. Here we get a warning that all data on the disk you select will be erased. And this right here is a hard disk that we created in the previous video when I created my virtual machine. And you remember that I gave around 30 gigabytes to my virtual hard disk, so this is that one, and I will select it and click on continue. Here it gives us some of the options as to how the disk can be partitioned. We will proceed with first option, which is all files in one partition, which is also recommended for new users. Don't worry about these other two options which mention /home, /var, /tmp. These are all just standard Linux directories, which we will see shortly after installation. So just click right here, all files in one partition, click on continue. The final steps are finish partitioning and write changes to the disk. We want to click on continue there as well. And right here it will just ask us, are we sure that we want to write the changes to the disk? We want to select right here yes, and we want to click on continue. So after clicking on continue, the installation process will start and it will take some time. It can take possibly around 20 to 30 minutes, maybe even longer, and it will also ask us a couple more questions in meantime. I will fast forward to the first question that pops up, and you just pause the video until you get to that step of installation. Okay, so here is the next question, configuring the package manager, and it asks us for the HTTP proxy information. Leave blank for none, and we do want to leave blank, so we're not going to type anything here, and we're going to click on continue. Here in the software selection, we want to leave all of the checked things, and we also want to add the large option. So leave everything checked that you see right here, and click right here on large. What this will do is it will install additional tools in our Kali Linux, and we want as many hacking tools installed with our operating system, so we don't have to waste time installing them later on. So just double check that all of these options are checked, desktop environment, XFCE, these lower three, and the large option as well should be checked. After you get all of that, click on continue. And this step of installing software will take some time. So just go grab a cup of coffee or take some snack, and I will see you in around 20 to 30 minutes. Okay, so after a long installation, here is another question. And it asks us, should we install the grub bootloader to the master boot record? First of all, what is grub? Well, grub bootloader is a software that loads Linux kernel. It is the first software that is started at system boot. Let us read what it asks us here. It seems that this new installation is the only operating system on this computer. If so, it should be safe to install the grub bootloader to the master boot record of your first hard drive. Warning: if the installer failed to detect another operating system that is present on your computer, modifying the master boot record will make that operating system temporarily unbootable, though grub can be manually configured later to boot it. We want to click here yes. And you might be asking, wait Alexa, but I'm running other operating systems. I'm running macOS or Windows. Don't worry, remember, this is a virtual machine. It doesn't know about your main operating system. For this virtual machine, this is the only operating system that is being installed. So it is safe to select yes and proceed to the next step. And in here, we want to select /dev/sda and click on continue. This will proceed to finish up our installation, and it might ask us a question or two more, and then we should be ready to use our Kali Linux machine. Okay, and this final step says installation complete, so it is time to boot into your new system. Make sure to remove the installation media so that you boot into the new system rather than restarting the installation. Since we don't have any installation media, and this is probably referring to a USB drive in case you installed an operating system over USB, and we didn't, we installed it in virtual machine, so we can simply just click on continue. This will finish up the installation, and then it will reboot our machine and open up our Kali Linux desktop. Here it is, our virtual machine is starting up for the first time. Finally, here is our login screen to our Kali Linux machine. Here we want to input the username that we typed in during the installation, so in my case it is Mr. Hacker, And down here, you want to input the password that you used during the installation. Then you can click on Login. And here it is, our first hacking machine. Now, in case you're wondering why is it smaller screen, well, to fix that, in most cases you can simply just do this, lower the screen, and then enlarge it once again, and now it should be in full screen mode. In case this didn't work, don't worry, in the next video we're going to perform some of the checks of our virtual machine to check the internet connection, whether it is in full screen mode, and other things as well. So don't worry if your machine isn't in full screen mode, it will be after the next video. Welcome back. I just want to touch on a subject of new releases of Kali Linux operating system. So I already mentioned when we downloaded our Kali Linux 2020.2 that in case there is a new version of Kali Linux available, feel free to download that one instead. And we can see already that there is a version 2020.3. Now, this is something that you will have to get used to. Kali Linux makes around 4 to 5 releases every year. The good thing about them is that they don't have major changes usually. For example, if we go to the blog of the official Kali Linux website and we navigate to the Kali Linux 2020.3 release, we will be able to see what are the new things that we have. So there is a new shell, and don't worry if you don't understand any of these. Most of these just give a different appearance to the Kali Linux itself. So these are the major things that they have changed since the previous version, and the most important part is this new shell right here. Now, shell and terminal is something that we will talk about later in the course. However, every time a new Kali Linux release comes out, you want to read about it just to see what is new. For example, I have downloaded the 2020.3 version, and you will see if you have the 2020.2 that there is pretty much nothing different. Even if you open the terminal, it will look the same. But what the new thing is that they talk about right here is the new shell, and that is ZSH. We can enter the ZSH like this, and this is a new type of shell that they are looking forward to change the bash with. However, all of the commands that we can run in a regular terminal also work right here. So there is pretty much nothing too different. And another thing that I want to talk about besides the new releases of Kali Linux is that you can always download the release that you feel the most comfortable with. For example, if you go to the website old.kali.org, you're going to be able to download all of the previous Kali Linux versions that came out before the newest one. And you will see only in 2020 there have been 4 different versions, and there is going to be one more, I believe, right now in December. So they release new versions a lot. Inside the course, we mostly use Kali 2020.2, but any new release that has some major updates, I'll make sure to create a video explaining what those updates are. Nonetheless, I just wanted to mention this, and let's get back to setting up our virtual environment. See you in the next video. Alright, we got our hacking machine running and ready to use. Before we get to explaining all of the stuff you see on the screen, first we need to make sure our machine is working properly. So we'll just go through a few checks. The first check that we want to do is your machine in full screen mode? Now, in the previous tutorial, I showed you what you can do to get it in full screen mode, and all you need to do is minimize this screen and maximize it once again, in case it already wasn't in full screen mode. And that is because newest versions of Kali Linux automatically set your machine to be in full screen mode without installing any additional tools for that. Usually, this trick should work. And if it didn't work and your machine is still not in full screen mode, then we need to install something called VirtualBox Guest Additions. And I would advise all of you to do it even if you already have a full screen mode machine, because guest additions will not only help us with getting our machine to be full screen, but they will also make our machine run smoother and better. In previous versions of Kali Linux, We always had to install VirtualBox guest editions to get the full screen mode, so let us see how we can do that in the newest version as well. First we need to do is we need to go up here and click on Devices, then navigate down to the Insert Guest Edition CD image and click on that. They should get imported, and in just a few seconds we should see a disk icon on our desktop. If we double click it, it will open a folder where we will see a bunch of files and other directories. Don't worry, we don't need to know what each of these files are or what do they do. The only thing we need to remember is the path to where these files are. And up here we can see that these files are located at /media/cd-rom0. So let us copy this. If we right click, copy. Now comes the fun part. We have to open something called terminal. And terminal is something that we will use for the entire course. It is the most important tool you need to master as a hacker. But for now, just follow what I do, and we will explain things as we go. To open a terminal, right-click on your desktop and click on Open Terminal here. It will open this window where we can execute our commands. And once again, since terminal is an important tool that you must master and learn from scratch, we will cover it in the next section in greater details. For now on, we just want to install VirtualBox guest editions. The first thing that we want to do is we want to navigate to that path that we copied. And to do that using terminal, we must use a command called cd. This cd command stands for changing directories, and you can see that we are currently on the desktop directory, which says right here. To change the directory, we type the cd command and then we paste the path where we want to go. So change directory /media/cd-rom. Press enter and you will see that in the next line we will be changing directories to the desired folder. Now, to list all the files inside of this directory, we need to type another command which is called ls. What this command stands for is simply just listing the contents of the current directory. So you can just remember ls to be a short command for list. If I press here enter, we will see a bunch of the files that are located in the current directory. These files are actually the files that we saw once we opened these VirtualBox guest editions. You can see these are the same files. Right now we are just there inside of our terminal. And out of all of these files, now we must run one of them. Can you guess which one? We know that we can't run the exe files since those are aimed for Windows systems and we are on a Linux system. But we can, however, run this one called VirtualBox Linux editions.run. If you guessed that one, congrats! This is the one that we will run. To run it, we can use a command that says sh VirtualBox Linux editions.run. And this sh is just a way for us to actually run this file, which we are also going to explain once we get to explaining terminal in greater details. For now on, if we press enter, this program must be ran with administrator privileges, aborting. For now, don't think about this and just run the following command. Sudo sh VirtualBox Linux editions.run. If we press enter here, you should get a prompt like this asking you for your password. Then type in your password. And keep in mind that even while you're typing, you will not be able to see anything appear right here, which doesn't mean that you're not typing. You are typing, just it doesn't show anything inside of the terminal. Once you typed in the password, click enter. And it will ask us, do we want to continue with the installation? We want to specify right here, yes. And it will start the process of installing VirtualBox guest editions. Now, you will notice that this entire process will be performed automatically. We do not need to do anything anymore. This will install on its own. And don't worry if there is a part of this entire process that you did not understand. We will discuss all of these commands and tools later on. This installation right here will take a minute or two, so let us just wait for that to finish. Okay, so it has finished, and we can see right here that it tells us running kernel modules will not be replaced until the system is restarted. What this simply means is that this installation will not have any effect until we reboot or restart our machine. So there are two ways that we can do that. You can either go in right corner right here, click on this and click on restart, or you can do it in the cool way using terminal. So if I cancel here and go back to my terminal and type the command reboot, it will say command not found, and if you get this message as well, what we want to do, we want to type sudo and then once again reboot, press enter, and this will restart our machine for us with just one command that we ran in terminal. Now we are ready to perform the second check, and the second check would be internet connection. So we want to see whether we can access the internet, and to check that we're going to use our terminal once again, and we will try to ping Google. So let us open up our terminal. We already know how to do that. Right click and then open terminal here. And if we receive responses back from Google, that means we can access the internet. So let's check it out. Type ping google.com. And here it is. We're getting responses back. Great, we can access the internet. To stop this, we must press Ctrl+C. As we can see right here, 21 packets transmitted, 21 received, and 0% packet loss. But even though we can access the internet, I want to point one thing out. If we go to settings of our virtual machine, and we select the virtual machine, navigate to settings, and from the settings navigate to network settings, we will notice that we're attached to NAT, and what NAT is a network address translation. This means that the IP address that our Kali Linux machine has will be given to us by a VirtualBox. So if I go to my Kali Linux and in the terminal type sudo ifconfig, press enter, enter my password, here we will see that we got the IP address of 10.0.2.15. And this is the IP address given to us by VirtualBox. Since this can present us a problem later on, we want our IP address to be received from our DHCP or from our router. And before I show you how to do that, I want to point out why this could present us a problem. Well, this IP address right here does not belong to the IP range of my local area network. If I go to my Windows machine and open up command prompt to check out the IP address on my physical machine, I can type right here ipconfig, and I will see right here that the IP address that my physical machine has starts with 192.168.1. And this is not the same IP range, it starts with 10.0.2. So I want to change this to start as my physical machine with 192.168.1. To do that, my Kali Linux must receive the IP address from my router. And for all of you Mac users, you can also type in ifconfig in your terminal on your Mac. Basically, you can check the IP address of your Mac the same way that we did inside of our Kali Linux by typing ifconfig. And all we need to do to change this IP address is go to the network settings and switch from NAT to bridged adapter. This will automatically set my bridged adapter and my adapter to be this one, since this is the only one I have. And since I'm connecting over cable connection, I want to go to the advanced and check right here cable connected. You can select your adapter right here, and once you do, click on OK. Just one more thing before we click on OK. In case your wireless adapter is not working in Kali Linux, since there are some wireless adapters that are not supported by Kali Linux yet, keep in mind that the cable connection will always work. So if your wireless adapter doesn't work, just switch the adapter to cable connection and then press on OK. Now that we changed this, if I go back to my Kali Linux machine and run the same command, which is sudo ifconfig, now it starts with 192.168.1. And keep in mind that for you it might start differently. It doesn't have to start with these three numbers. It might be something like 192.168.0, or it might be something like 10.1.1 or 10.0.1. It depends on your network. So now we can see that both of these IP addresses are starting the same. Okay, great. Now that we went through both of the checks for the full screen and network connection, in the next few lectures, we can proceed to get more familiar with the Kali Linux environment and hackers terminology. See you there. It is time we slowly start getting into penetration testing process. For now, we didn't yet perform any hacking, but we are getting there. It is important we get the basics first and that we know why we do everything, and trust me, later in the course, we will be doing some serious stuff and everything will make sense because we covered all the basics first and we didn't just jump into something without any preparation. So in this video, we will be briefly talking about stages of penetration test. How does it go? In which order do we perform the steps? And which steps are crucial? For now on, we got our virtual lab set up. We installed Kali Linux and all the tools that hackers use are now available for us in our machine. We also performed some configuration to it to get it full screen, as well as performed setup for internet connection. From now, the basic steps that we are going to do is we will use our Kali Linux machine to scan and attack different machines, networks, websites and accounts. But how are we going to do that? Do we just magically attack it? And do we just install virus on their machine somehow? And if so, how do we do that? What about Trojans, password cracking, or phishing? Is that what we do? Well, that is just a small portion of a penetration test. First thing and most important thing before we even start a penetration test on a target is to figure out, do we have permission to attack this target? This is very important since you don't want to be attacking machines or target networks that you do not have permission to attack. It could be that client told me to only test one machine on the network and not the entire network. Therefore, I'm only allowed to test that one machine. Or it could be that our client has multiple networks and they only allowed us to test one of them. That means you should not go around and try to hack different machines on a different network. Now, these are only some of the examples, but what's important to get out of this is that always have permission to perform a penetration test. Trying to hack or hacking something that you are not allowed to hack could potentially get you into some serious trouble if you get caught. Now that we got that out of the way, let us finally talk about different stages of penetration testing. We already know that there are 5 of them, and the first one is reconnaissance or information gathering. Now, reconnaissance is the act of gathering information about your target to better plan out your attack. And this step of penetration testing is the only one that you can perform on any website or target that you want, since gathering information about something is not illegal. There are 2 ways that we can go about doing information gathering: actively, by directly interacting with our target, or it can be done passively without interacting with the target. A simple example of this would be, let's say you want to gather information for Facebook, and you would do it actively by visiting Facebook page and getting all the information that you can from the Facebook page itself, while passively it would be if you went on some other website that talks about Facebook and you get information about Facebook from that other website. This would mean you never interacted with Facebook, therefore you performed a passive information gathering. After this step comes scanning. Here is where you can start getting in trouble if you do it without permission. Scanning is a deeper form of information gathering using technical tools to find openings in the target and in the systems that you're attacking. These openings can be gateways, open ports, operating systems that the target runs, and so on and so on. In this step, we also perform vulnerability scanning, which is just searching for vulnerable software in the target system or network that could possibly be exploited. After information gathering and scanning comes third step, which is gaining access, or so-called exploitation. And this is the step where we actually hack the target. We use information that we gathered in phase 1 and phase 2 to take control of any number of target devices. Gaining access of target devices allows us to steal data from their system or to use those devices to attack other devices on the same network. Usually, after this step, you can consider penetration tests to be successful since you managed to gain access to a target system. However, this is not the last step of a penetration test. After exploitation comes maintaining access. This step, with the fifth step, is sometimes optional. You might not need to always perform last two steps since client might only care whether their system is penetrable. Therefore, you prove them it is after the third step. If there was a vulnerability, of course. However, maintaining access is also an important step and it is commonly done by installing backdoors and planting rootkits. What a backdoor and rootkits are simply programs that will allow us to gain access to that target whenever we want, without the need to exploit it again. We just connect to the backdoor that we planted in the target system, and there it is. We are again on their machine. And last step of penetration test is covering tracks. Covering tracks is simply removing all evidence that an attack ever took place. This can involve deleting or hiding files, editing logs, or basically reverting any changes that you did to the system while the attack took place. Okay, so these 5 steps are the entire process of a penetration test, and we're going to cover them in great detail throughout our course. Keep in mind that these steps should be performed in order, and one more important thing is, in case you're a beginner, you might think that third step, which is exploitation or gaining access, is the most important step of the process. Even though it is very important and crucial, the most important steps are actually information gathering and scanning. It is in these 2 steps that we gather information about the target and discover vulnerabilities. So if you're not that good in gathering information, you might miss some things that could be used to gain access to the machine, therefore preventing you to find an actual vulnerability. So just keep that in mind, that information gathering is 70% of work. Okay, good, so we talked a little about these phases, but before we get to perform each one of these steps, we must first get a little familiar with our Kali Linux machine. So in the next few lectures, we're going to get into details about terminal and some of the commands we can run and execute with it. See you there.